So, The Running Man is the latest film from Edgar Wright, who you might know of Hot Fuzz and Baby Driver fame. And and if you're familiar with like his type of action films, like with Hot Fuzz and Baby Driver, you might be a little disappointed that The Running Man doesn't quite have that kind of like rip roaring nature and zip to it that a lot of his films had. Like it's not that fast paced. It's not that quickly edited, but I will give this. Wright's direction here is thematically on point. What Edgar Wright does is he takes this material and ensures that it still has a lot of the action and the excitement and a lot of the comical aspects that come with the satire of this dystopian story, but make sure that the greater point isn't missed here, and definitely put his own little spin on this material, which I think works rather well for being so refreshing. So if you're not familiar with The Running Man, like this story is actually closer to the book than the 1980s film. It takes place in a dystopian environment where the only way it seems to get cash is if you go on these, physically exhausting and demanding reality shows. And one of these shows is, of course, The Running Man, where people are hunted for sport, and if they can survive and not get killed by the hunters, they can win a lot of money. So thrown into this game is Ben Richards, played by Glenn Powell. And what I love so much about how Wright sets up these characters is that he sets up Ben as both a smart guy and an emotionally driven man who, he does have stakes. They establish him, he's hard up for money, he can't find a job, he's got a sick kid at home, he's got a wife that he's concerned about. So there's a lot to root for him on that front, but he's also smart enough to know, I shouldn't get in The Running Man. And I don't want to play for this amount of money, but also I'm kind of sick of everyone else telling me what to do. Like, there are several scenes where he's just fantasizing about smashing people's heads into glass or getting very confrontational with them. So it's easy to relate to Ben on that level. Now, of course, he doesn't want to go into The Running Man, but obviously we see where this is going. That Wright kind of like pushes us through the motions here, where he does end up, going along with the game only because he's convinced by the producer of Dan Killian, played by Josh Brolin, who is also surprisingly very smart. He realizes that, Ben is a hot-headed guy, and he's angry and he's furious with the system. And Dan just realizes, like, oh yeah, I can commodify that. I can not only commodify it, I can weaponize it to keep this whole thing going. So he convinces, like, Ben, that, you don't have any choice here. I know you hate my guts. I know you want to kill me. And that's what I love about you. So we're going to go ahead with it. And further throwing gas on this fire here is the Running Man show host of Bobby T, played by Coleman Domingo, who's just playing it up for the audience in his flashy attire and just making up lies about Ben to get the audience all worked up. Because I love how they do set up pretty clearly here that there's a lot of media manipulation going on here, with the way that they're framing Ben to be this guy who left behind his wife and daughter, that he's a greedy, terrible man, even though he's just trying to, like, fight his way back. And is just trying to do his best for his family and can't do it because the media keeps distorting him, because it keeps pitting, everyone else against the poor people, saying that, oh yeah, these people think they're better than you. They deserve to die. You see where this is going, and I get the feeling that for a lot of people, this is kind of going to be like a make or break element of The Running Man, because its satire is very much on its sleeve. It's making very clear in no uncertain terms that the wealthy elite will not only, commodify your anger, but also take further control of the government and just rationalize anything in the name of entertainment and money. So very vicious, very straight, direct capitalism critique. And, I get for a lot of people, they're probably going to be, a lot of people are going to look at this film and they're just going to think, okay, it's very on the nose. But another way to look at it is that it was very on point. And I got to appreciate that about a film like this, because it does have a lot of cool action sequences. There are like a lot of very violent sequences of people getting shot up. There's buildings exploding. There's a very dangerous car chase. There's a house full of traps where people get electrocuted and set on fire. All these violent big set pieces here, which are kind of cool to watch. But Wright doesn't want you to lose focus here. He doesn't want you to get distracted by all the glitz and the glamour and the excitement to just, immediately write this off. as mindless popcorn entertainment, which I think he mostly succeeds at. I think for a lot of people might get annoyed. It's like, okay, I get it. Yes, this is the fault of capitalism. The media manipulates us, and it keeps doing that over and over, and keeps, commodifying all of our rage. Like a lot for a lot of people, this is going to be a review, and I don't mind that so much because it makes it work here. And I think what helps make it work is that a lot of what happens with Ben when he goes on his journey of trying to avoid the hunters, including the lead hunter of Evan McCone, played by Lee Pace, who spends most of the film masked. I both love and I both hate how Wright compartmentalizes all the different people that Ben runs into to get like a bigger perception of the world around him. Like, he meets like some people on the street who are struggling to get by, similar to himself, and kind of realizes he has to hold a little bit of class solidarity. At one point, he meets a very eccentric rebel played by Michael Cera, who is all about printing zines and staying off the grid, and studying every aspect of the Running Man and how to defeat all the elites. And then there's also, a rich, spoiled white woman played by Emilia Jones, who keeps stressing, I'm not the bad guy, even though, she profits off a lot of what the Running Man is doing here. What frustrates me is that it's in all these little vignettes and doesn't really build much on it. There are some like lingering elements that do kind of gain a tiny bit of momentum as it goes along, but it always just feels like, okay, here's the section with like the rich girl that Ben has got to shout at and, try to convince of his situation. Like, here's the scene where he meets, Daniel Ezra's character on the street, and he's got to, work alongside him, but also realize there's only so much he can do. And here's the sequence where he meets with Michael Cera, and there's a big sequence involving all these traps in his house, which... It really does feel like in some of these sequences that Wright is trying to force the action. Especially, it's very clear with the sequence involving Michael Cera that they are trying to force the action. Because his character is very excited to kind of get into a fight with security forces, that he pretty much invites them into his house and sticks around. Like, he has an escape route but doesn't take it, and decides, like, I'm going to stick around and watch them get electrocuted on the ground, and watch how all my traps will spring out and explode them and set them on fire. And I get the idea that it would have been actually a pretty good punchline if he just shouted back at Glenn Powell's character, just be like, look, I spent a lot of time on this house setting up all these Home Alone style traps, and we're going to stay here and watch every single one of them go off before we leave. I did not put all this work in not to watch the carnage. So yeah, frustrated, but also kind of fun at times with how it sets that up. And I think the one thing that kind of really, really did it for me with this film was how it ended. Because like the film ends similar to how it does in the book, but at the point where it seems like it would cut off and that would be the end of it, it keeps going a little bit further and gives you kind of like a, I don't quite want to say a happier ending, but a more satisfying ending of how you want to see revolution happen in this type of environment. Because they keep talking about it throughout, like, oh, we need revolution, we need to fight back, we need to find a way to fight back, and we need to be smarter about it. We need to find like just the perfect tactics. And that's great and all, but a few years ago, like that would have worked as like a cautionary tale for this dystopian environment. But considering the fascistic world that we're living in right now, it's like we're already there. It's no longer a cautionary tale. We don't want to see, just what happens and what are like the little pieces that we got to put in place for the revolution. We want to actually see that revolution. And I do like the fact that Edgar Wright indulges that, which adds, I think, to a little bit more of the fun of the film, because it does kind of, lean a little bit more heavily on, Glenn Powell's charisma and a few action punchlines and one-liners here and there. And a lot of the giddy violence as well, too, which is not, I hate to stress this, but yeah, this is not as frenetic as Wright's other films. And I feel like I have to say that going in, because the first act is surprisingly slow. Like, it goes, don't get me wrong, the exposition that it goes through is pretty slick. Like, it doesn't waste too much time. It doesn't try to, like, slow Ben down. You do care for him. You do like him as a very intelligent character. But compared to Wright's other films, it does feel much slower. But again, I appreciate it if the themes are much stronger, and they are here. There is no mistaking in any uncertain terms what this film is about. This is a capitalism critique, and it's one about stressing revolution and why that is important in an environment like this. And and it sounds like, yeah, like this is a very obvious scenario, but you really do have to stress that so that people aren't just getting caught up and laughing at all the satirical elements. Like there's an annoying reality show called The Americanos. There's a really dumb cereal called like Fun Twinks. And and in case you're wondering, there is a visual Easter egg of Arnold Schwarzenegger in the film. But thankfully, it's not just like a handful of like references and pullbacks to, you know, the 1980s films. Like, oh, remember this? Remember all this nostalgia? It's like all that stuff would like crowd out the bigger messaging that's trying to be brought forth here, while still having, you know, that big action blockbuster element to it. So for sticking mostly on that thematic road, even though like Wright doesn't take many detours, I think it mostly gets the job done. I appreciated it. I love some of the action scenes here. Glenn Powell's just kind of FU nature I found to be very endearing as the film went along. And for just stressing revolution, I love the film for just being so essential in the moment right now. Is it as effective as other, you know, anti-capitalist and, you know, anti-fascist films? Not really. It doesn't really have the same heft, and I think it's pulled back from being better by just compartmentalizing all the different perspectives of this dystopian society. But for the most part, I think it gets the job done. I think a lot of people are going to come out of this film realizing what it's trying to say, and they'll probably have fun with it. And that's what ended up happening with me. I had quite a bit of fun with this. I mean, it's nothing all that entirely revolutionary, but hey, you know, Edgar Wright, for trying to nail the dystopian satire of King's novel, I think he does a pretty good job stressing the thematic elements while also putting more of his own spin on it. So yeah, I mostly enjoyed The Running Man.